Oh, hello friends, hope you're well. These little beauties you see in front of you are the first ever miniatures I painted, as you might be able to tell. My friend had given me these when I said I was interested in starting to paint, and I was pumped because Lord of the Rings is my favourite fantasy series, and to be fair, I think I actually got the colours for these pretty bang on. It's just that they look like they've been primed with mud and painted by a frog with 17 thumbs and no fingers. But yes, I've had a big soft spot for these minis, being the first ones I painted, and while I think it's important to save your old work so you can look back and see what progress you've made, I just can't help myself. I cannot control my excitement any longer. I've been dying to repaint these and see if I can make them look any better than they currently do, which shouldn't be very hard. So, first of all, I'm going to scrape off these bases as I'll be redoing those later, and I remember at the time I'd been really proud of how these came out. I'd used some little flakes of bark and some cork rocks to add a bit of variety on top of the flock, and I think they still look decent, but we can hopefully do a bit better. So for now, we say bye-bye bases. Next up, I'm going to strip off all this old gunky horrible paint using paint thinner by Tamiya. This is made for thinning down airbrush paint, but it's actually really good for stripping paints too, and it won't melt your plastic minis as it's alcohol based. I had varnished these guys when I painted them many moons ago, so I was a bit worried when the paint didn't start peeling off after 0.5 of a second contact with the thinner, but after a bit of scrubbing and the smallest semblance of patience, the paint started coming away. Now, these puppies did make me work for it, but in the end, the layers were wicked away to reveal their shiny metallic innards, and I didn't get 100% of the paint off, but more than enough to apply some primer. Metallic sculpts often have quite pronounced details, so a little bit of leftover paint won't obscure these in any significant way. And there's something really special about metal miniatures. I don't know what it is, but they speak to me on some primal level. Maybe it's my inner magpie seeing something shiny and telling me I must have it. Is that what magpies sound like? Don't think so. A bit more crow-like, maybe. Anyway, after a quick blasting with the hairdryer to dry them off, I'll get them primed and ready to paint. When I painted these for the first time, Gandalf was the first mini I painted, so in homage to young swamp rat pup, I will start with him again. And Eshin Grey is my first choice of colour for the robes, and I give a couple of coats to this to ensure maximum coverage. I'll be going with pretty much the same colour scheme I used previously for these minis. As I was happy with the colours overall, I just want to refresh them, clean them up a bit, and make them a bit bolder. Next, I use Abaddon Black to undercoat the sword for metallics, and some dried bark for his staff and belt. A quick blast of Ushabti bone goes onto the bandage emerging from his wizard sleeve, and some Cadian flesh tone for the visible skin. I use a small blob of Fenrisian Grey for the bushy hair and beard, which does look quite blue to start with, but will be alright once it's washed and highlighted to look a bit more old man grey-like. I'm going for a grey robe blue hat combo for Gandalf, so I'll whip out some Thousand Suns blue, which is a pretty magnificent shade of blue actually. And as I'm adding this, it's giving me strong wizard hat from RuneScape vibes. It's giving me flashbacks to my days as a lowly noob casting Windstrike on any unfortunate chicken in Lumby who dared to cross my path. I use some plate metal to paint in Glamdring, which is the name of Gandalf's sword and also the name of my and once that dries, I wash some Nuln Oil onto the robes, sword and hair, and some portions of the hat. A little bit of Reiklin flesh shade goes onto the flesh, and some Agrak Surf shade for the bandage here. I then highlighted the robes using progressively lighter mixtures of Skavenblight Dinge, Rust Grey, Fenrisian Grey, and Ulthuan Grey, but it ended up looking a bit too extreme, so I glazed on some more Nuln Oil to bring those colours down again. This is a good trick for when you've applied your highlights a bit too vigorously, or for when you need to blend your layers together without a lot of work. To finish Gandalf off, I give the flesh a very quick highlight, use some Ulthuan Grey for the hair, touch up the sword, and then bring a bit of volume into the hat by highlighting with some Crystal Blue and Baharoth Blue. The gem on top of the staff gets a tiny little tickle of Ulthuan Grey just to remind you it's there, and I think that'll do for now. I'm fairly happy with how he's looking so far. Minis always look a bit different once the base is finished as it kind of frames them in, so I think I'll get all the fellowship to this stage, base them, and then go around making any touch-ups I think are needed. Gandalf's hat, for example, is looking quite light at the moment, so we may come back and sort that out at the end. Anyway, next up we have the Son of Groin. No, sorry, the Son of Gloin. It's Gimli. Right, straight away there's a fair bit less of Gimli to paint, so we'll keep this one short. I start with some corn red for the tunic, as this is quite a nice dark red which is almost burgundy when it dries. And then I base coat all the leather pieces, which I want to be quite dark and rich, so I use a healthy splattering of some rhinox hide. I use Mournfang brown for the satchel at first, but this looks too light against the red, so I'll go for dried bark instead. I also use dried bark for the belts and the various little axe handles which poke out too. I feel bad for excluding Mournfang brown however, so I use this on the hair and beard to give it a bit of a ginger twinge. A dwinge if you will, or a twinger? Anyway, the flesh gets a quick touching in, some rust grey onto the sleeping roll, and then some plate metal and auric gold for the metallics as the few last base coats. And now it's time to slosh around a few washes again, so I use Carabao Crimson for the tunic, Nuln Oil for the silver metallics, Agrak Surfshade for the golds, and also the beard and hair, and finally some flesh shade for the skin. He's looking pretty decent by this point, but of course we'll add some highlights to elevate that a bit. To do so, I simply go around with my initial base colours first to brighten up those washes a bit, and then drop down to a slightly lighter tone to add some subtle highlights. And boom! That's Gimli finished, and Fimli Ginished. Again, I'll probably come back at the end to tidy up and add any finishing touches, but I'm pretty pleased with him. Not perfect, but undeniably Gimli. Next up is everybody's firstborn favourite son, screw you Faramir, it's Boromir! We start off with corn red again for the few small red undergarment things which poke out from beneath the coat like inquisitive snails from their shells who heard there might be some cucumber nearby. Next, Abaddon Black goes all over the coat here and onto any pieces which will be metallic like the sword, shield and tip of his horn. Rhinox hide goes on for his gloves and boots, then I whack on some more Mournfang brown for all the other leathers. You'll notice I'm using a lot of the same colours between these miniatures, which I could wind together into some complicated metaphor about the unity of the fellowship, but really it's just because I like them, so we'll just go with that. Anyway, for the final few base coats, I add some Cadian flesh tone to the face, Gorefall brown for the hair and beard, and some Ushabti bone for the horn. I mix some corn red and dried bark together to make a decent looking colour for his shield, and finish off the base coats by adding some gunmetal to the shield furnishings, the fastenings on his coat, his sword, and then some Balthasar gold onto the horn. For our washes, I use some Agrak Surfshade over the face, hair, horn and leather pieces, Carabao Crimson over the reds, and some Nuln Oil over all the remaining metallics, gloves and boots. And once all those have dried, I go back around and add some highlights. The flesh will get the same treatment as all these minis will, a tiny bit of Kislev flesh and move on. The black coat gets highlighted with a small amount of Eshin grey and the red with some Wazdaka red. I highlight the leathers with a smidge of Scrag brown, while the gloves and boots get some Gorefall brown. I then pick out a few hairs on the head and beard with some Steel Legion drab and touch up the metallics to finish this bad boy off. I will be adding, or at least attempting to add, eyes to these minis, but I think I'll do them all at the end to make it a bit easier for myself. So our next victim will be the fair-headed Maid Marion, it's Legolas. I get him started by lovingly slapping on a couple of coats of Lauren Forest to the main tunic, and then some Nurgling green for the little bits of material poking out on the knees and elbows. Gorefall brown is used for the boots and vambraces, while the darker Rhinox hide goes onto the quiver and straps. After that, I use some dried bark for the bow and the arrow shafts, because bows and arrows are made from wood, wood comes from trees have bark, dried bark, ladies and gentlemen. A tickle of Fenrisian grey is added to the fletchings on the arrows, and then I finish off the base coats by adding some more Cadian flesh tone for the skin, and flesh skits yellow for the hair. The hair does look offensively bright at this point, but we'll tone that down a bit in a moment. Next in the process, we're slavering on our washes as we always do, using Seraphim Sepia for the hair, Reikland Flesh Shade for the flesh, Athonian Camo Shade all over the green parts, Agrak Surf Shade on the boots, vambraces, and finally some Nuln Oil on the quiver and arrows. And finally for our highlights, I've mixed in some Screaming Skull to the yellow I used earlier to make a lighter colour and picked out some of the hairs. I also mixed some Nurgling green into the Lauren Forest to add some highlights to the tunic, and some Ulthuan grey into the Nurgling green to touch up those knees and elbows. The boots and vambraces got some Steel Legion drab, the straps got some Mournfang brown, and the fletchings got a tiny bit of Ulthuan grey. I wasn't really happy with Legolas at this point. I think I was getting a bit tired of painting, so I was rushing to try and finish, but the only thing rushing achieves is sub-optimal quality. So instead, I went to bed and came back fresh, ready to lay down some sweet, sweet coats of paint on my boy, Aragorn. And yeah, just like the others, nothing fancy. We're going first with some Mournfang brown for the tunic thing, some Caliban green for the outer coat, and then a bit of Abaddon black onto the boots, hair and sword, ready for metallic blasting later on. Rhine oxide goes onto the shawl and the quiver, while Dryad bark goes onto the bow. A sliver of Fenrisian grey goes onto the bedroll and this weird handkerchief looking thing, some Cadian flesh tone for the skin, plate metal for the sword, and then finally back to Abaddon black to trace on a little beard. And I am certain you're getting bored of me regurgitating the names of paints by now, so I'll blast through the washes and highlights with lightning speed. Athenian camo shade for the green parts, Agaric surf shade for the brown parts, known for the dark brown parts, and Roken flesh shade for the skin. Mournfang brown, Scrag brown to highlight the tunic, mixtures of Caliban green, Warpstone glow, and Mute green for the coat, Eshin grey for the boots and hairs and beard, Mournfang brown for the dark brown. Mournfang brown for the dark brown bits, Sulphur grey for the bedroll and the handkerchief, and finally some Kislev flesh for the skin. Woo! There we go, that was a bit quicker and less mind-numbing for you, wasn't it? I am sure it was. Anyway, moving on. Now, my friends, these minis were taking me a lot longer to paint than I had anticipated, and while I didn't want to rush them, I did want to get them finished before I went away on a little mini holiday I had planned. So, as my boy Smeagol famously said, it's time to run a train on these naughty little hobbits. We'll form a gulag-style work chain here and start slapping down paint onto these halflings. And while I get to work on those, I just wanted to say a massive thank you to everyone who had subscribed on my last video. I was genuinely blown away by the amount of people who had watched, liked and subscribed after watching it. My subscribers had more than doubled in the space of a week. And while I'm still a teeny tiny little channel in its very early stages, I just felt really grateful. It was really encouraging to get all that support and has spurred me on further to make more videos for you guys. I have a million ideas of different videos and creations I want to make on this channel. My only challenge will be finding the time to do all of them. I'm currently in a slow and steady upload pattern, but I'll be increasing the frequency of video uploads in the future as I become more efficient with my process. Well, hopefully anyway. I'll also be making a bunch more how-to videos, focusing on cheap hobby and alternatives like the homemade mud video I'd made. So if you enjoy those, please feel free to subscribe and stick around to see them soon. Also, one of the reasons I'd started this channel was because I wanted to become a better painter and diorama builder and just hobbyist in general, and be able to share my progress along the way. There's a bunch of painting techniques in particular that I'm planning to learn properly, like how to paint power swords or faces or non-metallic metals, etc, etc, and I've been thinking about making some videos which show the process of learning these skills properly. They wouldn't really be how-to videos because I don't even know how to do a lot of these things properly myself. It would just be a noob learning them and maybe taking you guys along for the process. I don't know. Let me know down below if you'd have any interest in videos like that. Although I might just make them anyway because I've been having so much fun making videos and putting even more time into hobbying since I started this channel. But that is enough rambling. I'm not even sure what I've been saying at this point. So yeah, let's bring our attention back to these hobbits. And as we can see, they're almost finished now. And much like their taller fellows, they're not perfect. There's a lot of things that could be improved, but they're looking a lot better than they were before we stripped the paint off. These hobbits were actually really fun to paint overall. I was able to bring out a semi-batch painting method which allowed me to get them finished way quicker than the other ones I did, without sacrificing too much on the quality. Some parts were quite challenging to paint because they are tiny little cheese-loving, hole-dwelling halflings much like myself, but I still enjoyed giving them a fresh new coat of paint. And I would say that's just about enough painting for now, so let's move over to our basing and give these guys a nice new patch of dirt to walk on. Except as always I've forgotten something, and this time it was to paint the eyes on. So I go around quickly trying to paint the eyes on as neatly as I can, which is especially difficult because these minis are very small. I didn't bother with the double G's, Gandalf and Gimli because their eyes are obscured by their headwear, and I thought trying to paint them on would probably end up ruining them. This was a painful process, but we got there in the end. Now, for our basing, first of all I'm going to squidge on some of my homemade mud mixture, and I'm not applying this too thickly as I don't want to obscure the feet, just enough to give the bases a small coating. Once that's dried thoroughly, I'll take some larger rocks from this basing mixture and glue them on with some super glue wherever I think looks good. I allow that to dry once more and then apply some watered down PVA mixture. Onto this, I sprinkle some of the base ready mixture and then also dust on some fine flock to add a little bit of greenery. Once that's all dried and set in place, we can finish off the bases by giving them a nice rim job of Steel Legion Drab. This is one of my favourite parts of the mini painting process, as it signifies our minis are finished and we have come to the end of our journey. Our completed minis are the proverbial ring being cast into the flames of Mount Doom, and now we soar away on the mighty eagles of Steel Legion Drab rims. Let's see how they came out. So, here we go. Watch them spin and let me know what you think. I feel like I could have done a whole video painting each of these, as it was quite an involved process, and I actually wanted to go a bit further adding details, but ended up running out of time. I might still add those details just to make these look even better for myself, but they may never see the light of day in another video. I think I'm pretty pleased with these guys overall. I could be really critical and point out the messy little splotches of wash or the wonky eyes and the scuffed highlights, but looking at my original goal of repainting these to look better and bolder, I reckon we've accomplished that. I think my favourite ones are probably Gandalf and Gimli. I love the blue of Gandalf's hat, as it's a really nice vibrant contrast against his robes, and Gimli just looks pretty good to me, really. That's it. He's a little bit messy in places, but I think he's recognisable straight away. My least favourite is probably Aragorn, actually. I think I should have been a bit more adventurous with the colour scheme maybe, as he's looking a little bit bland in my opinion. And somehow his face has ended up resembling an evil badger. But, you know, to be fair, I do really like how they look all together. I don't think there's any doubt this is the Fellowship of the Ring when you look at them. Also, I forgot to say that I added a few grass tufts to these bases, and some of them have come out quite well, while some of the other bases look a little bit messy. For the ones that have come out quite messy, I was thinking, was it even worth the time in changing the old ones? But it was fun to make them even if they aren't perfect. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? Having fun. If you're not having fun when you're hobbying, then what's the point? Anyway, mixed bag with this one. A lot of things I like about the minis, some things I don't like so much, but overall I'd say I am really happy with them. Thanks for watching if you've made it this far in. Please feel free to subscribe and drop me a comment to let me know which one is your favourite or, which one's your least favourite. And also let me know if you'd have any interest in videos of me learning to become a better painter. I have been your boy, Swamp Ratio, and I will return when the white gulls call and the pale moon rises. See ya.